I've lived in this house for 10 years, right on the edge of the Nevada desert. It's a quiet place, predictable. The sun sets, the stars come out, the coyotes sing. But last night, that predictability was shattered. Everything changed the moment the sun dipped below the horizon. The living room light flickered on automatically, just like it always does. I was on the couch, reading a book. I reached for my glass of water on the coffee table, and that's when I noticed it. Or rather, I noticed the lack of it. My hand, reaching out, cast no shadow. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. I waved my hand back and forth over the table. Nothing. It was like my hand was made of pure light. I stood up, my heart starting to thrum a nervous beat against my ribs. I looked at the floor around my feet. No shadow. I looked at the couch, the lamp, the bookshelf. The entire room was bathed in a clear, even light, but it was a light without a counterpart. There were no dark shapes huddled behind the furniture, no silhouettes stretching from the legs of the table. The world inside my house had become two-dimensional, a flat image without depth or mystery. My first thought was that something was wrong with the lights. Maybe some weird new energy-saving bulb I'd forgotten I'd installed. I walked over to the floor lamp and switched it on. Same thing, the pool of light it cast was bright, but it didn't create a single shadow. I moved around it, expecting my own silhouette to dance and stretch on the wall, but there was nothing. It was deeply unsettling, like a fundamental rule of physics had just been casually tossed out the window. It felt like the light wasn't coming from the bulb anymore. It felt like the light was everywhere. I started to panic a little. I rushed from room to room, clicking on every light switch. The kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom. It was the same story everywhere. Bright, sterile, light, and a complete and utter absence of shadows. I stood in the middle of my hallway, with lights blazing from every direction, and I was just a figure in a brightly lit space. No shadow followed me, no dark twin was tethered to my heels. It was profoundly alien. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was an atmospheric phenomenon, some bizarre reflection from the desert dust, a trick of the evening light, but the sun was long gone. The sky outside was a deep star-dusted indigo. This was happening inside my house, only inside. I pressed my face against the cool glass of the living room window and looked out. The old cactus in my yard had a long, distinct shadow stretching across the sand, cast by the porch light. The world outside was normal. The shadows were right where they were supposed to be, but inside it was like I was in a different dimension. This is when the real fear began to creep in. It wasn't just a weird glitch with the lights, it was something else. I started moving around the living room again, this time more slowly, more deliberately. I watched the light, and that's when I saw it. The light wasn't just on, it was active, it was intelligent. As I walked toward the bookshelf, the light seemed to intensify slightly in front of me, perfectly illuminating my path. When I reached out to touch a book, the light seemed to wrap around my fingers, leaving no part of them in darkness. It was like the light itself was moving, anticipating my every action. I tested this theory. I stood perfectly still, then suddenly darted to the left. The light shifted instantly, seamlessly. There was no flicker, no delay. It was as if the light source wasn't a bulb in the ceiling, but something that was tracking me, filling in every potential dark space around me the moment it was created. I wasn't just in a house without shadows, I was in a house where shadows were not allowed to exist. The light was actively erasing them. It wasn't just the absence of darkness, it was the hunting of it. I felt like I was being watched, not by a person, but by the house itself, by the very light that filled it. I backed away slowly, my eyes wide, scanning the room. The familiar comfort of my home was gone, replaced by a clinical, observant pressure. The couch wasn't just a couch, it was an object perfectly lit from every conceivable angle. My books weren't just books, they were shapes without secrets, their spines lit so evenly you couldn't see the tiny crevices between them. The texture of the world was gone. I had to get out. I couldn't stand another second in that perfectly, horrifyingly lit space. I fumbled for the front door handle, my hands slick with sweat. The light followed my every movement, clinging to me. I threw the door open and stumbled out into the cool night air. I turned around, my heart pounding, and looked back into my living room. From the outside, it looked normal, a warm, inviting glow spilling from the doorway. But I knew the truth. I stood on my porch for what felt like hours, just breathing, watching the normal shadows of the desert night. The shadow of the porch roof on the wall, the shadow of my own body cast by the exterior light. They were comforting, real. They proved that the world still made sense, that cause had an effect, that light had a dark partner. After a while, my rational mind started to kick back in, telling me I had imagined it all. Stress, fatigue, that's all it was. Hesitantly, I stepped back toward the door. I peeked inside. The living room was just a living room. The lamp was on, and there, on the floor, stretching from the leg of the coffee table, was a faint but definite shadow. I took a cautious step inside. I looked down, and there, attached to my feet, was my own familiar, elongated shadow. Everything was back to normal. The light was just light again. The shadows were back. I spent the rest of the night with all the lights off, sitting in the dark, watching the moonlight create long, beautiful shadows across my floor. I don't know what happened last night. I don't know if it was my mind, or if my house, for a few terrifying hours, decided it didn't need shadows anymore. But I can tell you this, I will never take them for granted again. I'll never see a simple shadow as just an absence of light. It's proof of reality. It's the depth that gives the world shape, and I'm not sure I ever want to see a world without them again. Now, every time the sun goes down and the lights come on, I hold my breath for a second, and I watch the floor. I just watch, and I wait, to make sure my shadow is still there with me.